This is Inside PHL Council, bringing you the latest news from Philadelphia City Council, straight from the source. Inside PHL Council is hosted by Joe Grace and Patty Gillette.
Welcome back to Inside PHL Council. This is the podcast of City Council, featuring a different council member each episode. I'm Joe Grace, Council's Communications Director.
And I'm Patty Gillette, Council's Deputy Communications Director. Good afternoon, Joe.
Hello, Patty. As usual, we got a lot to cover. We always say that before we get to our guest, Councilmember Allan Domb. I'll take a quick crack at the first issue, which is online sheriff sales, which is a hot topic these days between council and the sheriff's office. First, council learned that the sheriff planned to go to all online sheriff sales of homes where the owners had fallen behind on their mortgages or their taxes or both. Then, led by Council Majority Leader Sherelle Parker, Council held a long hearing, about 6 hours, whereas they say a full and robust exchange of views took place. The sheriff, Rochelle Bilal, said her office was going to move forward with these online sales and would use a vendor, a bid for assets that it had selected without any competitive bidding, and awarded a 6-year contract. Council said not so fast, Sheriff. The hearing produced a host of witnesses pointing out that the COVID-19 pandemic had put a lot of homeowners in arrears on their mortgages or their taxes through no fault of their own, particularly Black and brown property owners. So the sheriff backtracked and said the online sales would be a pilot and they'd assess how it's all going a few months from now. Councilmember Parker said that's not good enough. In a letter to Common Pleas Court signed by a majority of her colleagues, Parker asked the court to stay the sheriff sales and pointed out that the American Rescue Plan of President Biden was sending $350 million to Pennsylvania to help homeowners with mortgage foreclosure issues. On Thursday, Common Pleas Court President Judge I.D. Fox issued an order halting all sheriff sales until September and noted the federal funding that's coming to Pennsylvania and to Philadelphia. Patty, this is a heck of a story.
It absolutely is a heck of a story. And I do think it shows the power of advocacy once city council members get involved, if not for that, long 6-hour hearing and Councilmember Parker's advocacy alongside some very vocal advocacy of Councilmember Jamie Gauthier and Helen Gim. These online sheriff sales would be happening right now. And if you are a homeowner in Philadelphia who is behind in your mortgage or your taxes because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and you've been told that money is on the way from Washington to help you, you certainly don't want your house to go up on sale before you have an opportunity to save it.
I know we have a lot more to cover today, but this is worth 20 more seconds to bounce off you. Council takes on a lot of issues, every week, every month is what they do. And oftentimes you don't necessarily see the result of an issue that gets brought up in council. This is like an actual result, and it feels significant to me. Absolutely.
I think, again, if you're a homeowner in Philadelphia and you have a reprieve until at least September, it's significant to you. It's literally the roof over your head.
Good for Councilmember Parker, and good for, as you point out, all the council colleagues that have stepped up to the plate with her on this issue to protect homeowners. Patty, what else is going on in City Council right now?
It's that time of year again. It's budget hearings. This is Council's annual review of the mayor's budget proposal, and that's starting Monday, May 3rd. The mayor sent his budget proposal. It's $5 billion to Council recently, and now Council begins the long process of reviewing the spending and revenue plans, one city, department, and agency at a time.
What do you see as the hot button budget topics this spring, Patty?
Well, the police department and the funding of the police department will certainly receive a large amount of attention in this year's budget. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder at the hands of police in Minneapolis and incidents of police-involved shootings across the country and here in Philadelphia, specifically speaking of Walter Wallace Jr. last fall in West Philly, all of this is going to get attention. And so on one hand, we will have the many advocates for change in how the police function in Philadelphia and, calls to defund the police. which is an umbrella term. That term means different things to different people, but there are certainly progressive members in council who will be receptive to at least putting those arguments and those points of view on the table and having them become a part of the budget process. On the other hand, the city is still experiencing an alarming level of gun violence. We are currently on track for at least 600 homicides this year, which would be an all-time record. We know that we had 499 homicides in Philadelphia last year, and that was with a significant quarantine for most of the year for our population. So it's a huge concern, and there are going to be council members who believe we need more of a balanced approach between calls for reforming police and maintaining levels of public safety in the neighborhoods hard hit by gun violence. So we anticipate that this is going to be, an issue that is kind of addressed throughout the budget process.
I think you framed it really well, the pro and the con. When will the police department budget be considered by council?
Wednesday, May 12th is the date for the police department to testify before council. And that is part of a larger public safety day. The fire department and the Department of Prisons will also testify that day. But people should be aware that, that the budget won't be settled that day. We usually don't pass the budget in totality until around mid-June.
What else looks hot during the budget discussions this spring besides the police?
Certainly how the city plans to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and reopen our local economy. At the heart of that are going to be taxes. They're always a critically important issue, but no less important than now. The mayor is proposing a resumption of gradual incremental reductions in the wage tax and reductions in business taxes, which the business community and some suburban commuters might be inclined to respond to.
Right.
And on the other hand, we have advocates in the city, as well as members of council who will think that, with 400,000 people, at least 400,000 people still living in poverty in Philadelphia, and many of them struggling to survive the COVID-19 pandemic, that now is not the time to be talking about business tax cuts or wage tax reductions for commuters. And it's instead that we should put that revenue towards city services. So we anticipate, again, a discussion that's going to run throughout the budget cycle. We're going to come back to tax reductions versus city services and investing in lifting people out of poverty.
Police funding levels and taxes, COVID-19 recovery plans. This is going to be a very meaty budget debate and series of discussions this spring. Looking forward to it. It's going to be very interesting as always. What else did council do last week?
Council member Catherine Gilmore Richardson had 2 bills approved in council, one of which is attracting quite a bit of attention. It's a quality of life piece of legislation aimed at helping neighborhoods struggling with drug paraphernalia stores and sales that are popping up all over the city. It is bill number 210159, and it modernizes the definition of drug paraphernalia to help the city better enforce the code against businesses who may be intentionally skirting the code in the zoning process. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, this is how she framed the discussion after the bill passed. She said, we're seeing these stores pop up overnight, applying for permits as grocery stores or convenience stores, or advertising that they're candy stores, but it is clear they are only operating to sell tobacco and drug paraphernalia. These businesses don't improve our corridors, and they don't create jobs for our young people, and they don't build wealth for our families. This legislation will especially help Black and Brown communities where these stores are predominantly appearing.
This is like a textbook example, I think, of the kind of strong stand and standing up for quality of life in neighborhoods that council members really are known for. Good for Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson. Patty, would you like to introduce our special guest today?
Absolutely. Our guest today is Councilmember Allan Domb. Councilmember Domb has been on council since 2016 as an at-large member. He is a successful businessman. He owns and leases real estate all over Philadelphia, and he brings that perspective to City Council. He has some ambitious proposals concerning wage and business taxes, which he introduced right before the budget process started. And he is, really interested in having this conversation about those reforms as we try to recover from the pandemic and support businesses and create jobs. So that's one of the reasons why we timed his appearance on the podcast to happen right before budget season.
I can't wait to hear from Councilman Domb. And you're right, he's going to be a perfect table setter into the budget debates, and we'll have a lot more coming to our listeners in subsequent episodes of the podcast. Patty, as usual, great job. Great chatting with you.
Thanks, Joe.
Like what you're hearing? Be sure to subscribe to Inside PHL Council on your favorite podcast app.
We're here back on Inside PHL Council with Councilmember Allan Domb, who's an at-large council member who was inaugurated in 2016. Councilman, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Pat? Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Earlier this month, you introduced a legislative package of 3 bills aimed at reforming the city's tax structure, specifically with respect to the wage tax, which impacts those who live and work in the city, the net income and gross receipts tax, which impacts businesses. Can you talk about the purpose of this legislative package and specifically the timing of it as the city attempts to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic?
We hate to waste this crisis. This is a tremendous opportunity for the city of Philadelphia, as Winston Churchill said. And this is an opportunity because we're getting $1.4 billion from the federal government for the city and $1.3 billion for the school district. But, overall, when you look at all the metrics of how Philadelphia has done in the past, we've always said in the last several years, we've done pretty well as a city. But when you compare us to every other city, we really haven't done that well. And that's where the concerns are. As an example, Pew published a report showing the top 15 cities in the United States and showing which cities had the highest deficit shortfall in their budget. Detroit was number 1 at 17%, and Philadelphia was number 2 at 14.7%. And that was a heartbreaker for me. That's horrible. Atlanta and Baltimore were below 6, 5.4 and 5.8, and Boston was 1.9. We should not be next to Detroit. To me, that was a report card on what we've been doing the last 5-6 years. And I don't like the grade we got for the work we've been doing. So these bills are around that issue and others to try to change the trajectory of the city of Philadelphia. And as an example, here are some of the facts that we are dealing with on a daily basis. 1 out of every 4 people in Philadelphia live in poverty. We're falling behind our peer cities and suburbs on almost every economic performance measure. Of the top 5 cities on the East Coast, we have less people working in our city versus the suburbs than any other area. We have less Black-owned businesses than any of the other cities on the East Coast. We have the fewest number of small and mid-sized businesses per capita. We have fewer jobs than surrounding suburbs and surrounding cities per capita. The discrepancy between the businesses per capita in the suburbs, as I mentioned, and the city is far worse here than in any other East Coast city. We're like the worst. And that's a heartbreaker. Philadelphia depends on wage and business taxes, which are less stable, as was proven during this economic downturn. This pandemic has only shown us that we've kept ourselves in this financial situation because of a lack of willingness to change. Now is the time when we should take advantage of this opportunity and make that change and make us more attractive, make us more competitive, and reopen our economy in a really great way. Philadelphia is not an island. We are in a regional and national competition today, not just for businesses, but for residents. We've never experienced before this situation where people don't necessarily have to live close to where they work. They can live in another location. People have many choices today. And in my opinion, we need to change if we want to be a first-class city in the coming years and decades. We really haven't performed well compared to other cities over the past 6 to 10 years.
Councilman, good afternoon. Thanks for being with us. I'm going to follow up on your answer to Patty's question. So you submitted your legislation on taxes just before the mayor proposed his version of an FY2022 budget. Now that you've seen the mayor's proposals, how would you say your legislation on tax reform compares with the mayor's proposals? Have you gotten any feedback from the mayor or his team? And also, have you gotten any feedback as yet from your colleagues on city council?
The proposals that we put forward, we had no idea what the mayor's budget was going to contain. And in general, our proposals are bolder than the mayor's proposal. And I think we need to be bolder. This is the time to be bold. This is not the time to be timid. The mayor's proposal on wage tax for a $50,000 income earner over 5 years is $23.60 saved over 5 years. It's about $4.60 or so, 65 cents per year. It's almost like a cup of coffee. To me, that's not exactly bold, okay? Our reform package would reduce the wage tax rate at a much faster rate over 20 years. We would go from 3.87 down to 2.9 over 20 years, which Governor Rendell did back in the 90s, which got us from 4.97 to where we are today. And we would get to 2.9 for residents, 2.8 for non-residents, and it's about a 25% reduction, again, over 20 years. We've also researched, Joe and Patty, I don't know if you're aware of this, but of the top 25 cities in the United States, New York City has the highest corporate income tax at 17.2% for businesses. Philadelphia has the second highest at 16.2%, and every other city is below 10. Now, if you're a business in the city and you want to expand, I don't know that you're going to do it under that scenario unless you're in a KOZ, a Keystone Opportunity Zone. If you're a business looking to come to Philadelphia, like Amazon was or others, you're not going to come here under those tax requirements. We've held back our ability to expand our economy with our tax structure. So this reform package not only reduces wage taxes at a faster rate, it also takes the net income of the BERT tax from 6.2 down to 3 over 10 years. And the other research we did, and we heard this, one of the things I love about council is that we have all these hearings, especially in the Finance Committee. And I heard in the Finance Committee recently, and I heard 3 years ago, and I heard from the Commerce Department and experts in Philadelphia, that we are the only city in the United States that taxes gross receipts and net income. We're the only one. And every one of them said, this is what's holding back your job creation. These are job killers. These taxes kill job creation and job growth. So the third bill states you have to pay the higher of the two, either net income or gross receipts, whichever is higher, but not both. So we're trying to do something dramatically different, and we're trying to do something that's bolder than the mayor's policy. I applaud the mayor for tackling these things, but we need to do something much more aggressive. This is our time. I mean, we're not going to do it now when we're getting $1.4 billion from the federal government. When will we ever have this opportunity to make Philadelphia the best it can be? I mean, I believe my colleagues, we want our city not just to do well, we want it to be the best in the United States.
One quick follow-up and then back to Patty. And thank you, Councilman. I know it's early. The budget hearings don't start till Monday. Any feedback yet from any of your colleagues on your tax reform proposals?
Well, I did have two of our colleagues support Mark Spill, I believe, supported all three bills, and Kathy Gilmore Richardson supported two of the bills. And I'm working with my other colleagues right now and seeing what they can support. So we'll see how that works out. But, I'm hopeful that we'll gain traction here. And I will say this, I'm not married to anything except making Philadelphia more competitive and as competitive as we can be. And if someone has an alternative that'll do it, I'm all ears. But right now, I'm looking at this backdrop of highest corporate income tax, second in the country. Everyone else is below 10, and we're at 16.2. Wage taxes that are some of the highest, and the only city in the country that taxes gross receipts and net income. And then we wonder why we have a 25% poverty rate, low job growth, and the average income in Philadelphia compared to 20 cities is at the bottom. So
very, very interesting, compelling points. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague.
And this is one of the reasons we wanted to get you on the podcast this week before we started budget, because we knew that these are the kinds of meaty conversations that, we would be previewing for a budget like this. There's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily watch all of the budget hearings, but these are the conversations that happen every year. And I've been with council since you joined us in 2016, and you have always been extremely attentive to the budget hearings, and you ask the tough questions. You're the one in council chambers with the big binder, and diving down deep. And to go back to that time, you were elected to council in 2015, inaugurated in 2016, and now you've spent 5 years as an elected official. So let's talk about that transition and what you've learned. Can you give me an example? And it sounds like taxes might be one of the things. Can you give an example of something about the operations of city government that you got here and learned and was incredibly frustrating?
I will say this. I've learned that you need 9 votes to pass a bill and 12 votes to avoid a veto. I learned that, Patty and Joe, on the wage tax bill that council passed unanimously, I believe, over a year ago. Because originally we had passed the bill, but the mayor didn't sign the bill, so it didn't go through. And then we passed it with more than 12 votes, the wage tax bill. And that was based on research we did that showed of the top 25 cities, kind of interesting. We tax lower income people the highest, which is an embarrassment. We were taxing people with average income of $32,000 a year, 18.1%, while other cities were between 10 and 14%. Cities like Phoenix, Chicago, LA, they were between 10 and 14, and we were at 18.1. So the wage tax bill was based on data, and it reimburses wage taxes for lower income people. So they can't even buy food or pay bills. They shouldn't be paying us wage tax. That money should be going back to them so they can survive. So that to me was something I learned, that you need those 9 votes to pass, 12 to be veto proof. But also I will say the most important thing, I think, for me, is to eliminate as much as we can the poverty level in our city. That is number one. I mean, as Council President Clark said, taking 100,000 people out of poverty, that should be on our radar every day, every minute. That should be the focus. And I believe these tax bills will help, to a degree, get more jobs in the city. The best way out of poverty is a good paying job. That is the best way out of poverty. I will say one other thing, Patty, while we're talking about this, and this is my thing, I think, and you know what I'm going to probably say. And I believe this is the time to make it happen. I've been talking for 5 or 6 years now that we should be having in our school system mandatory financial literacy pre-K to 12th grade in every class, mandatory pre-K to 12th grade teaching of technology. How important is that today after what we've just been through? And mandatory teaching of entrepreneurship. Instead of teaching people how to work, teach them how to own. Teach them how to, I always said, you make a living working. You create wealth owning. Let's teach our children how to own businesses. And the last piece of that is that I'm pushing for is from 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade in our public schools, we should allow students to work a day a week and go to school for 4 days and have 4 different job experiences. I know Cristo Rey High School does it. They do a phenomenal job. They're graduating over 90% of their students. That exposure for a young person gets them on the right track and gets them into either a college or a professional, whatever they want to do, it gets them on the right track.
And actually, you've been talking about Cristo Rey for a while now, since you've been in council, and you actually have been talking about the financial literacy for a while. And I think you and I have had conversations about this. I know this from hearing from students themselves. My husband's a high school teacher. The students are asking for it. The students want financial literacy education. I've talked to teachers, and they say the 2 things that students want added to their high school curriculum: financial literacy and civics education. They want those 2 things. And I mean, you wouldn't think that students would say, give us more learning, give us more education, things like that. But those are the 2 things that they see as 16 and 15-year-olds looking out at the world that they see lacking in their education. And I think it's really important to have the school district, as we go into education, the school district hearing is talk about how important that is to the curriculum, that our students get these life skills, and I think the pandemic in the last year has opened their eyes, and even more of them would agree with that.
Let me tell you where I'm coming from with these things. 25 years ago, think about it. Who are the top 5 companies in the United States? General Motors, Exxon, maybe U.S. Steel. Who are they today? Amazon, Apple. It's a different world. Microsoft's up. All technology-based companies are the top companies. And if we're not teaching tech to prepare our children for not just today's economy, but tomorrow's economy, they will not be able to compete. So that's why it's so important, not just financial literacy, but the tech and the entrepreneurship. And I'll also mention pre-COVID, I had started a program in the free library system where we were teaching financial literacy to adults. I think we had 3 or 4 classes, and then the COVID hit. And we also had classes up at State Road. I don't know if you're aware of this, where we were teaching financial literacy to those people who were leaving State Road prisons and giving them a class in financial literacy, so when they came out, they'd be able to be financially capable and get on the right path. And I don't know if you also know that we supported, I guess I paid for 178 public school teachers to take a course at the Federal Reserve over the last 5 years, where they take it at the end of June, and they're able to teach now financial literacy in schools. We're teaching over 5,000 kids in public school financial literacy based on those teachers. And any public school teacher who is interested in the class, have them reach out to us or to you and give us their name, and we're happy to sponsor them once we get back to more normal learning, I guess, after COVID.
You should really be commended for that.
You know what? It's dear to my heart. I mean, I'm only doing this to try to help. I came to Philadelphia. I don't know if you know this. I was making $15,000 a year. I had zero. I grew up in an apartment where we were evicted when I was 12 years old. The rent was $100 a month. We lived in 800 square feet. We had no hot water for 2 weeks. And my mother called the mayor, who was a volunteer of the town in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And we got water the next day, 62-unit apartment building. And the landlord lived in some town I never heard of called Lower Merion. But 30 days later, he evicted us from the apartment building. And so, and I'll tell you 2 more quick stories so you understand where I came from. I had 2 paper routes when I was 11. 5:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the afternoon. Growing up, I had fancy glasses that we drank out of. I finally asked my mother when I was like in my 20s, "Hey, Mom, what are these glasses? Were these mason jars?" She said, "No, those were the Hellman's mayonnaise jars that I recycled that we would drink out of." And then when I was 16, I was on the wrestling team, and there's tons of stories I can tell, but at 16, I wrestled till practice till 6:30 at night. And I was a janitor from 6:30 till 10:30 at night, 4 nights a week. And I remember I was getting paid $1.60 an hour. I think the thing that I was focused on was I would always save my money. I saved before I spent. And that's why financial literacy is so important. I'll tell you one last story, then I'll stop. I'm 4 years old. My grandmother takes me and my little cousin, she was 4 years old too, to a store right before the holidays and says, "You can buy anything you want for $20 for the holidays." And my cousin picks out a doll. My mother loved to tell this story. I turned to my grandmother and said, "Grandma, would it be okay if I took the $20? Then take the gift." But I saved it.
That's a great story.
And that to your point, financial literacy is so important because we know, just from interacting with students in the school district, in the high school, they've all already got jobs. They're all working. They're mostly because a lot of them need to support their families. But I can't tell you how many times that I've been out in Center City or out in my neighborhood, and I've run into one of my husband's students who's working at Rite Aid, who's working at Walgreens, who's working. They know they're earning money. They need to know what to do with it. They need to know how to make it last. And that's super important. We're going to try and bring, we talked about your frustrations. We're going to try and bring it around positive. And I think I might know what you're going to say here, but let's see. What is something you've learned about city operations that surprised you, that in a positive way?
I will say this. I'm very grateful for my time in council because I learned so much. I learned about the budget. I learned about how the city works. I had no idea. People who aren't in government have no idea how the city really works. There's no way you would know how the city of Philadelphia can operate. And that experience to me is invaluable. And I'll also say I've made a lot of great relationships, including both of you, but also among my colleagues. And it's been really fulfilling for me, and I really have enjoyed it. And I look forward to it. You can't work in government unless you really like it. And I always say government is very much 51% hospitality and 49% technical. So you have to know the technical. You also have to want to help people. Like when people call me with constituent service problems, I love helping them, and I love calling them back, making sure they're happy with it. I also will say this: I think we should change in the city of Philadelphia how we answer the phone. I think we should start saying, "Thank you for calling the city of Philadelphia. How may we help you?"
It's very Marriott. For those of you who know, Marriott for many years was well known for its customer service, and that was their brand was to start every interaction in a positive way. So that's right from business.
I think you would stun, and I'm not trying to sound too funny, you would stun taxpayers. You would stun them, Councilman, and everyone's laughing, and I'm not even trying to be that funny. It's from being a Philadelphia native. I think you'd stun them. That's why I was so quiet when you said that.
You may not remember this. They probably would think they're on an old show called Candid Camera.
Exactly. I remember it. Patty and Aaron are too young, but I remember it. Let me pivot to the pandemic. You've had a lot to say during the pandemic, about the pandemic. So as we do this podcast with you, we're just about 14 months into this COVID-19 pandemic. No one expected it would be this long, but it has been. Hopefully we're nearing, the beginning of the end of it, hopefully. But if you had to look back over these 14 months, what are the, one or two biggest lessons that you plan to take with you moving forward, not only as a successful business owner, but as a city elected official? What are the lessons of this pandemic that you're gonna carry with you?
What I learned during the pandemic, and my office through my chief of staff, Aaron Sanowar, we formed a hospitality group of restaurant people, hotel people, event people, over almost 100 people. And we met, I think it was like almost every 2 to 3 weeks. And we asked them back in May, we didn't have the ideas. We asked them, what can we do to help you? And they are the ones who came up with, get us outdoor seating, get us these chalets or parklets, get us, tented areas where we can still survive. It was their ideas. We were just the facilitator of this. And that's where these two bills came from for outdoor seating and the chalets. And I understand over 800 restaurants actually participated. And I did learn from the pandemic something very interesting, which my office put in the legislation, which was that it required the city to approve these applications in 3 days. There was a time frame. And to the city's credit, they did. It's kind of amazing. So I learned a lesson that it's important to put time frames sometimes in legislation. That do it now concept is very important, especially during a pandemic. The other things we did during the pandemic is we reached out to 16 different banks. And every one of them said yes with one phone call, asking them if they would provide loan forbearance for borrowers who were in trouble, had lost a job during the pandemic, small, medium, and large businesses couldn't pay their payments. Every one of them said yes. And a forbearance is basically postponing those payments 3 to 6 months to get through that period. All 16 banks in Philadelphia stepped up to the plate immediately. And then after some of the violence occurred, sadly, we formed a insurance program where we had volunteers from different insurance companies help small businesses apply for the insurance for the damage that was done to their stores. Because the insurance really didn't kick in from the pandemic. It kicked in from the violence on their policies. And we wanted to make sure if they had the insurance, at least they can get reimbursed to rebuild and reopen. Those are just some of the things, but I think the other part of it is that my colleagues supported those bills 100%. They were great, and I think in Philadelphia we did the best of any city in helping the restaurants survive. And you go to any other city, they don't have the level of chalets and outdoor seating that we have in Philadelphia, and we hope to make that permanent. I think that's a game changer for the city. I see suburbanites who want to come in the city and dine under the stars because it's so exciting. And during the pandemic, what else could you do but go out to eat? There's really nothing else we could do. There was nothing. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't travel. You couldn't do anything. So in many ways, saving the restaurants saved all of us. It saved our sanity.
Can you just get a real quick follow-up on that? That was a very interesting answer. That idea of that working group, that of sitting down every couple of weeks with your team and restaurateurs and others and listening and letting them come to you with ideas. Have you continued to use that model? Do you think that model is useful as you move forward, whether it's on taxes or some other aspect of the budget or whatever it is? Because that was interesting to hear that.
I think that's the model we need to follow on everything we do. I will say that in many ways, the people out in the business world and people in the residential world, they know what the answers are. We don't always know them. I don't know them. But we got the ideas from the people that are doing the job every day. And any business owner will tell you the best ideas come from the people who are working in your business. In city government, the best ideas come from the people working in city government on how to make government more efficient. They know how it works. They can figure it out. What you have to do is ask them, and they're happy to help. In fact, they're honored when you ask them. If I was on this tax reform, we've been talking to people all over the city who are in business and asking them what is the issues, and that's where part of this has come from on these tax bills. But we should do that, Joe, on everything we do. We should be asking people for their input. It's invaluable.
It sounds so basic. I'll turn it back over to Patty, but it sounds so elemental what you described. But I wonder how often city government does that, that model of truly listening and soliciting ideas from, as I think you put it, the people we serve. I wonder how often we really do it that way.
I think we do. I mean, if you always do it more, but I think we do it.
Okay.
Yeah. To your point about putting time limits on things, I think of like what this body was able to accomplish, and you reminded me in referring to the civil unrest and what we were able to accomplish last spring with all of that going on around us, Councilman. So obviously we had the pandemic and we were still getting our feet under us on the pandemic, and then the unrest came in May, right around the time we were getting started with the budget. So we had to then restart the budget. And what a lot of people in Philadelphia may not appreciate is that our deadline to pass the budget didn't move. We still had to pass it by June 30th. And we did, because we had to. And that is a function of the council members coming to agreement on tough decisions together, all 17 of you, coming to agreement. And it was also a function of, staffers and everyone putting in the hours to make sure that we could have virtual hearings and we could do this and we could do everything we normally do in over 3 months that we can do it in a month, and we are faced with doing that again this year. Hopefully we won't have the constraints that we had last year, but, starting next week, we've got to, figure out how we're going to spend $5 billion in the best interest of the citizens of Philadelphia. So I know you're looking forward to it. This is your time to shine.
Well, we'll say this though, Patty. I think a lot of this is credit should be given to Council President Clark. He was the leader in this whole thing. He organized it. He had a great technology team. He had both of you on your, you and Joe and the whole council staff. And really, without that leadership is what created the ability for us to continue. Everything was shut down. Council kept going. In fact, I would argue that council worked harder in the summer of 2020 than ever any other summer before, because I don't believe we took off. We kept having hearings and meetings, and we were there because we knew we had to be there to help everybody.
His communications team will concur with your assessment that we've worked harder, and you got a couple hardworking colleagues on this call with you, but on this podcast with you, but I feel it. We certainly in 2020 we worked harder than I can almost ever recall working.
But you know what, Joe? That's when the people need us. They don't need us when things are great. They need us when things are not great. Right. And hopefully we answer that call. But that's when they really need us. That's when leadership's needed, when things aren't so great.
Agreed.
Yeah, and you aren't the first person to say this. We've had a couple of different council members on this podcast last couple of weeks. Councilmember Brooks talked about getting phone calls, asking for help, and her deciding or knowing that I don't know how to solve this problem that this constituent has, but I better figure it out because that's my job. And Jamie Gauthier said the same thing. So I think that the 17 of you and all the staff members at council, and everybody who's working so hard on the administration side, we didn't have the answers, but it came down to we got to figure it out.
But I do think, coming back to what we first spoke about, we have an opportunity now. We're on the ability to get $1.4 billion of federal money. This is an opportunity for us to really change the trajectory of the city, to make us more competitive, to reopen the economy, and for us to be stronger than we've ever been, and to really tackle the poverty. Clearly, what we've been doing the last 6 years, when you see all these metrics and all these evaluations, we've done okay, but we haven't done really well when we compare ourselves to other cities. If we compare ourselves to Philadelphia 30 years ago, phenomenal. But all the other cities are doing way better. So all I'm saying is we can do better. And some of this is this tax structure that we need to really adjust.
Well, I think that's a great way to close it out, Councilman. And one of the final things I would add is that we try to be, with our budget process, more transparent than any other city in the country. So everybody in Philadelphia can follow along our budget process. It's phlcouncil.com /budget 2022, and people can see everything we're debating over the next month or so.
Well, listen, Patty, thanks for having me here today.
We appreciate you. We really do. And not just your time today. We appreciate what you do and the common sense wisdom you bring to City Council, born from your years in business.
Thank you. It's really from my mom and dad. That's where I learned it from.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman.
Thank you. Take care.
Visit our website, phlcouncil.com, where you can subscribe to this show, get contact information for each council office, learn more about our legislation, and find dates for upcoming hearings and meetings. Follow us on social media. We're PHL Council on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Inside PHL Council is produced by Philadelphia City Council. This episode is adjourned to the call of the next upload. Thanks for listening.